Len was in. Maybe Len was in X-Men. Did you see that?
That's great. Aliveness. Good.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear Len? Test, Len, test.
Hi. Testing. If Jack thinks New York traveling less than 700 miles an hour. Testing.
How are you?
Good.
Well, I think this is the youngest band I've ever seen at a comic book convention. A big Joker fan.
He has no choice. He's here because he's...
Will you stand up? Say hi? No? You won't stand up? It'll be like that? Oh, here we go. He's going to stand up, ladies and gentlemen. Can you see that? That is so cute.
Yeah, there's nothing at all intimidating about the Court of Owls.
Oh yeah, the Court of Owls guy is here. Just by everybody who's in costume, can you stand up? I want to see your costume. Court of Owls, we got Wonder Woman, awesome. The Baby Joker, who else do we got? Baby Batgirl, oh my god. That is a cute baby Batgirl. Who else over here? Who's the one in the rabbit ears? Awesome. And you look great too. And the Scarecrow and his mother, or father here, that's good. So that's good. How many people have read an X-Men comic book in their life? And how many people are fans of Wolverine? And how many people know that the man who created the all-new X-Men and Wolverine, right? Yes. The creator of Wolverine, how many people know that's him right there? Right? Amazing. You could not possibly have known when you decided to create a character called Wolverine that he would become maybe the largest selling comic book character in the history of comics.
Absolutely not. I would have made a much better deal.
You made a much better deal for yourself. That's funny. And you know, now we know Wolverine as like having an adamantium skeleton and all that stuff. What was your original idea for
Originally, the adamantium was in the costume, not in him.
Was it the costume?
Yeah. I always figured adamantium was indestructible, so you could put a coating on the costume, only one molecule thick, and it's fine, it's still indestructible.
Oh, that's true, yeah. And then when you, when the very first time when you saw him in that issue when he popped the claws, what was your reaction when they came out of his skin? Were you like...
I never thought, I think it's the coolest thing in the world. I wish I'd thought of it. But I still to this day don't think it works. If you've got those things going up the back of his fingers, that means he can't really move his wrist without cutting his hand off every time he does.
Yeah, that's true.
So I've never figured out how they work, but I just think they're so neat, who cares?
Yeah, that's true. And nowadays, like with the internet, as soon as you do anything slightly different with the character, the internet explodes.
Yes.
What were your guys thinking at the time to take a book that had been around since the 60s, which was about 16 years by then? About 15 years?
Yeah, 65.
Yeah, and then you decided you were going to like wipe out most of the team and bring in a bunch of characters no one had ever heard of. And what was the, I mean, did you have to make that argument, or you were editor-in-chief at the time?
I was actually, when the book was first revised, that they were going to bring back the X-Men. I was not the first.
Straight down.
Oh, I thought this had to go here. Can you guys hear it?
Like more towards the left.
I was not the
like opposite.
when it was decided to bring the X-Men back.
It's on the opposite side.
You have to hold it a little closer.
And they're in the guys who made Wolverine.
Am I still alive?
There you go. That's perfect. Okay. Okay, so you're saying, as far as redoing the X-Men?
When they first decided to revive the X-Men, I was not the editor-in-chief, I was the assistant editor. And so it was actually the idea, believe it or not, of somebody upstairs in bookkeeping to revive the X-Men. Well, all of Marvel's books were selling very well, we were told, in certain foreign countries. And somebody in the accounting department had the idea, well, why don't we do a book starring characters who come from those countries, and maybe we'll sell better, because we couldn't be selling any worse at that particular time.
And that is so funny. I wrote, as you know, I wrote the X-Men for 7 years. I've never heard that story before. That's amazing.
It's true. So finally, when I created Wolverine in The Incredible Hulk, I made him a mutant specifically so that whoever ended up writing the new X-Men book would have a Canadian mutant to play with. And I did that.
How many months before that was
About 9 months.
Oh, yeah. So it was on your radar even then?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, Roy finally assigned the book to me, which surprised me, and gave Conway. And we created this 4 group of heroes from different countries. We picked the countries we liked, we picked a mix of characters we liked. And nobody ever told us from upstairs in accounting what countries the books were selling within. So for all we know, we didn't pick a single country where the books were selling.
I can imagine that Kenya was a really big comic book distribution system.
Yes, it was a whole different creature altogether.
That's funny. You talk about Dave Cockrum. Like you look at Nightcrawler's costume today, and it still stands apart from anything that's out there. But really, when you look at those initial X-Men costumes, I mean, I don't know. It was like Dave was on some kind of bizarre genius. He is a genius, and yet, like, what did you think when you first saw them come in? You must have been
I was always a fan of Dave's costume design. When we sat down to create the new X-Men, we were working from, I generally have a rule in my head about what types of personalities and what broad stroke types of powers. One character is strong, one character can fly, and one character can fire bursts or energy from their hands, and one character is a misfit. And so we sort of said that Dave loved designing costumes. He spent his spare time filming book after book for costume designs. So when we sat down to do the X-Men, I had in mind the kinds of powers I needed, the personality potential I needed, and he had all these costumes.
Yeah, isn't there a famous story about like Nightcrawler was originally designed for?
Nightcrawler, of everybody in the book, he was one character who had actually been footnoted or footmarked for another book.
Legion.
The Legion of Superheroes. And wanted to make Nightcrawler a Legion. And Murray Boltinoff, who was his editor at the time, looked at the character and said, "Are you crazy? He looks demonic and creepy and icky. No one would want to read about him." Everyone would say what a great editor he was.
Well, it's kind of interesting you say that, but like I wonder, like if Nightcrawler had been someone else, maybe he would have been right. But I mean, it's so interesting how like the right creators and the right characters just
Yeah, sometimes it's just timing.
Yeah.
It's finding people who like the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, he may have lasted like 2 issues of the Legion of Superheroes and got killed.
You never know. That disaster.
What the heck? Oh, that was a video.
Now 40 years later.
You know what's funny is that, when I do, I've been having to redo some characters and stuff, and, like Raven is a perfect example. People will be like, oh, Raven, you ruined her costume, you gave her feathers. And I'm like, if you really look at the original Raven, it was a woman with a cloak with a beak.
Yes, exactly.
And if I created a character tomorrow who wore a cloak with a beak, I would probably not be long with the industry, but
That's true.
But similarly, like to name a character Nightcrawler, which is essentially a worm, right?
One of my favorite covers is Scotty Young. When they started the new
All those covers.
books, he did a Nightcrawler cover, which is Nightcrawler, who is a work in the Nightcrawler.
That's so funny.
Facing off against Wolverine, who's a Wolverine.
Oh, that's a real Wolverine. That's funny. We have some free issues of X-Men that Len and I are both going to sign.
We are.
To anyone who has a really great question for either one of us. So, does anybody have any questions? Okay, you're in the
Wow,
man with the camera. It's always the man with the camera who always asks the first question. Let's give him a big hand. Man with the camera. Is this a Peter Parker costume?
Actually, it's kind of a vintage Wolverine 70s homage. So, my question is, with the demise of Wolverine planned next month, and you as his creator. Number one, what are your thoughts about that? And number two, what would you want to see as a truthful death for a character that's been around this long? What would we do with justice for that?
The acoustics in here are catastrophic. Could you repeat that?
Yes, what he said was, oh, sorry. What he said was, as the creator of Wolverine, Wolverine's going to die next month. Spoiler alert, sorry.
Yeah, big spoiler, he's going to die.
He wanted to know, what do you think about his departure? And what do you think, as the creator of the character, would make a spectacular send-off for somebody who's been around for so long?
I think the spectacular send-off would be to blow him to atoms.
Blow him to atoms?
Atoms. And what do I think about killing him? Right.
This could be a good way to get rid of him.
Yeah,
What do you think? Just splatter him. That'd be great. It's a great poster.
I'll tell you what, let me ask you a question.
You have a question?
In this environment, how many people actually believe Wolverine is going to stay dead? Wow, no hands. I'm stunned.
Was there another question back here? Yeah. How are you? What is this costume you're wearing? Derby for My Little Pony? Derby, that's awesome. You look great. Stand up so everybody can see you. Wow, don't you look great? My Little Pony, awesome. Okay, Noah.
What is your favorite character from the X-Men?
You're going to have to repeat everything, I'm sorry.
Oh, she said, what was your favorite X-Men character?
Wow. I should freak everybody out and say Thunderbird. But I heard of it. It was actually initially Colossus. I like the idea of that kind of huge, powerful figure being essentially an innocent, which he was. He was a quiet farm boy who turned into a truck.
And that was based on you, right? You were always a very sweet, innocent guy, and yet a powerhouse at the time, right?
Most of the characters are based in part one way or another on me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I want to know what your inner story. What was your inner
Wolverine,
story?
you should see how hairy the neck is.
I don't think any of us should see how hairy your neck is, but you're right here. So my favorite was writing Professor X. I always thought, like to me, the guy that creates this huge, massive following that people have been throwing themselves at his idea of a better world for all these years. That was my favorite character. Yes, sir.
What gave you the idea to make Wolverine over the dirt?
What gave you the idea to make Wolverine as old as dirt?
Well, actually, that wasn't my idea. That was, I think, Chris Claremont and Dave Cockles.
Yeah, that's true. That came later. So I think the initial, if I remember, the thought was that since he had a healing factor, the idea is that I know they were originally going to do a scene where Captain America meets Wolverine for the first time and sniffs, and Wolverine sniffs him, and he's like, "You're Steve Rogers." And it turned out they knew each other as far back as World War II. So that was the idea, was they wanted to play with the notion that a guy who had
It was one of the things I loved about that. When it was the idea was introduced, I loved it. I thought it was a great idea. I had written a number of episodes of the first season of the original X-Men TV series.
Oh, I did not know that.
About a half dozen. It was for Ian Sabal. He had his own building and theater in Hollywood.
And you?
And Cheap Man.
No.
Well, the show did so well the first season. He cut the script fee for the second season on the assumption that it was so popular, anyone would want to write it, so we didn't have to pay him much. And so I told him where he would stick a show and walk away, like anybody.
And now he has a building and you do not have a building.
Yes. And about 2 years later, the show was still on the air, and I got a call from the story owners, Eric and Julia Leroy, friends of mine. And they said, "We got an episode of the X-Men for you." And I said, "Is he paying like he used to?" And they said, "No." I said, "Then why did you call me?" me, you know I don't want to work for less money. I think that's wrong, frankly. He said, no, you're going to want to write this role. I said, why? And I said, well, the story is Logan teaming up with Captain America during World War II to fight the Red Skull. And I went, you bastard, when's it due? It's one of my favorite episodes.
Was it a
called Old
two-parter?
Soldiers. You can see it on the air all the time.
What episode is it called? What's the name of the episode?
Old Soldiers.
Old Soldiers from the X-Men TV animated show. Okay. Sir?
When Angel turned into Archangel, did you like that character design at all?
Whoever's idea was to put this in the middle of the fact.
Oh, when Angel was recreated as Archangel, what were your feelings about that design?
I was crazy about the costume, frankly. I didn't think it was attractive. Angel probably, per capita, has had more really stupid looking costumes than anybody who should be that sleek and cool should. I mean, they just don't seem to understand the visual of aerodynamics.
You know what I always found interesting about the Archangel transformation is, to me, the coolest thing about Angel was he was the guy with the hollow bones who was up, was hanging out with Cyclops who could knock over a mountain, and Iceman that could freeze the entire town. And you had this guy with probably the most useless of all their powers, and he was right there with them. And to me, that's what I thought was cool about him. So then when they said, oh, let's reimagine him as this angel of death, I was like, it was never worked for me. So.
It's amazing they pay us to do this, isn't it?
Right? They should pay us to do that. Oh, yes.
With evolution and the development of Wolverine and other characters that you've created, where do you see them, or where would you like to see their development 50 or 60 years from now for the future audience, like when my daughter reads even more of those comic books?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to be here 50 or 60 years from now and see what it all turns out.
You never know the way technology's going.
50 or 60 years in comic books is an eternity. It will have gone through 25 incarnations at least between now and then. And to try to imagine what it would be like and what the books and the characters would be like a half a century from now. I was there a half a century ago when we started this and had no clue it would be what it is today. So try to guess again what it would be like another 50 years from now. I'd be in the nursing home in Babylon.
Well, then the other thing too is that, people, I was kind of interesting because maybe it was a little different when you were doing X-Men. Certainly by the time I got through it, when Stan and Jack, those guys were creating these characters, I don't think anybody had any notion that Spider-Man would be still published even 5 years from then,
Nobody did. I mean, I was there at the beginning, not at the company, but as a fan. The first Marvel comic I picked up was Fantastic Four #1. So I really started at the very beginning of Marvel comics. Nobody expected the superhero genre would continue as strong as it has for 50 years. The first time superheroes had been the hottest things in comics, it lasted about a decade. Started in the late 30s, by the early 50s, and 12 years later, most of them were gone. The only thing DC had left was Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Marvel had nothing. They had tried, I think, in the mid-50s to revive Cap and Human Torch and Superman, but that hadn't worked. So when they started doing superheroes again in the early 60s, nobody expected them to last beyond the mid-70s, which is why Nick Fury to become Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though he fought World War II, how Reed Richards and Ben Grimm, both of them GIs during the war. Nobody ever figured, okay, we're going to have to deal with this 60 years later. These guys are now in their 90s, technically still fighting. Why they have to keep rebooting, bring it up to the newest war. I mean, Iron Man started out getting blown up in the Vietnam War, and now we got blown up in Afghanistan last time or two.
Yeah, I think now it's Syria, I think.
The next time it could be Watts or something.
I just want to ask you look at all some of the books that they're putting out now, like My Little Pony and stuff. I mean, it's really heartening to see that, you know, a lot of the anime, people dressing up as anime characters, you know, like this couple here, you see the Superman and the Batman, and that's all great, but I think it's really inspiring to see the fact that we're, you know, growing in the industry.
When I started writing comics, there was every genre. I wrote westerns, I wrote war stories, I wrote romances, I wrote hot rod comics, as well as superheroes and mysteries, of course, which were very big. And then for a period from like the 80s to the late 90s, if it wasn't a superhero, it didn't get published. And I miss that. I love the fact that the industry seems to be broadening to the point where all the genres are slowly coming back.
I think we all miss your hot rod era. I think when you say, is everybody missing all the hot rod comics? You're all liars.
I couldn't drive when I was writing hot rod comics.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I had a friend who was kind of, you know, a car fan, and he would give me all the information.
I would have to say that if I had money to bet on it, I would bet that of all the genres that are not going to come back around, I'm going to guess hot rod.
Yeah. At least
Romance really is good.
I was just wondering, if it were that X-Men created today rather than being a complete franchise series, what would be done differently in the design and the way that it was gone about creating?
Not necessarily anything. I think creation is the act of creation. I don't think it changes of its time. I think good creation can be created at any time. As I said, the technology will be a little bit more updated. The politics are involved will be more updated. But the basic concepts will really come from, I don't think changes that way.
I say, like, when you know, some jobs you take when you're writing comic books because you get asked to be the new Iron Man writer, or you get asked to be the new Captain America. But when you were asked to create the X-Men, I mean, I remember even for the first year of the series, it was still bi-weekly, right?
No, the first year was monthly.
It did start monthly? I think you're wrong. I think he's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to say it right here. But having said that, I mean, it's like, there's just no way you could have thought that they were going to catch on, right? Like,
No, you hope. Every character you create, you hope will be a success. But you never go in betting on success because that way assures certain secondary.
Well, like, to this gentleman's point about how you would do things differently. Like, maybe if you had overthought this group of X-Men, maybe it never would be like, you know, sometimes, like you say, it's just the act of creation that is so awesome. For so many people have tried to duplicate that concept many times.
There is a phrase in Hollywood which I love, which is that in Hollywood, nobody ever wants to be first, but everybody wants to be the first and the second. And that's what people do. Something's a hit, everybody immediately tries to duplicate it. That's how we got to the mess of the gritty superhero. Everybody wanted to do Watchmen and The Dark Knight. And both of those characters were done because they were not the same as everything else. And then everybody else will try to be exactly like them, and they lost the whole point.
I tried to be like you for a number of years, and then I decided to be like me.
Much smarter.
Wonder Woman?
If Wolverine had a child that nobody knew about, what would his powers be?
If Wolverine had a child that no one knew about, what would the child's powers be?
Oh, probably childs who checks the size of Dallas. I have no clue. I mean, whatever the writer and artist who come up with that character.
Well, you did say that all the characters had a little bit of you in them. So if you had a child that no one knew about,
he or she would be a terrific dancer.
a terrific dancer. That is the answer. Yes, sir.
Who have you collaborated with that you just felt like they brought the most to your works, that it just seemed like what the finished product was more than what you had going in?
Try it again.
With all the artists that you've worked with over the years,
Yes.
who are some of the people that, or the one that you had the most relationship where they brought the best out of you?
Bernie Wrightson, number one above all. Walt Simonson was great fun to work with. George Perez.
Well, just to you and Bernie did Swamp Thing.
Yes.
And then what were the standouts of the other guys you mentioned?
I missed the last
What were
one.
the standouts about, like, when you and Walt worked together, you and George?
It was interesting. I did the first half of my run on Thor with the great, and I do mean great, John Buscema. And it took me about 2 weeks to script every issue. I don't know why I just did. And when John finally said I'm done with Thor, and Walter came on to replace him, I found I could write a scripted an issue of Thor over Walter in 2 days. And just something about how he approached the book was so smooth that it was easy to write, and it wasn't a job whose work was magnificent to look at.
And what about you and George? What did you write?
George is just an interesting, fun challenge. You know, I put out my stories page and panel, generally, so I ask for a 6-panel page, a 5-panel page, and George will say, got it, and then give me a 9-panel page, a 12-panel page, because George just likes to put stuff in there. And so it's always an interesting adventure trying to dialogue off of George's pencils, because he has to leave room for words somewhere. And he does.
I know, it's crazy. Crazy.
This question is for both of you too. Are you satisfied with Hollywood's depiction of the X-Men films? And if not, assuming you had control, how would you do it differently?
The question is, are you and I respectively happy with Hollywood's treatment of the X-Men films? And if not, what would we do differently?
I am thrilled with what they've done. When I teach writing to various and sundry, the high schools, colleges, wherever I have to be asked to come in and explain writing, the first thing I say is that you must be careful to write for the medium you're working in. Do not write a comic book and then be upset, that the movie doesn't the same thing. The movie can't be the same. If you write a movie as if it were a comic book, we're going to have a terrible movie. There are visual limitations. There are technological limitations. You have to write and give the audience what can be produced. And so I've written my own, I've adapted a number of my own stories over the years for live action features, for animation. And I changed my stuff probably more than anybody else would to make it more accessible for the medium it's now in. You know, the great line in the first X-Men, what, yellow spandex? When they did the Daredevil movie, the first one, well, the first one, and so forth, there's a point where Bullseye says, and I want a costume. Well, they loved the Bullseye costume, and so they moved the Bullseye costume and put Colin, whatever the hell his name is, in the Bullseye costume and went, God, that looks stupid. And it did in real life. And it looks great when Frank Miller was, but not so much when someone has to wear it. And so he got the other thing, the tattoos, the trench coat. But you can't expect to have something that is exactly like the comic book. If you give an audience something that's exactly like the comic book, you have failed in your job.
Well, and specifically with the X-Men too, it's hard because I think I was writing it in its 35th year. So to try to write to try to cram 35 years worth of 60 characters into 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours just becomes hard. So you have to make a bunch of difficult choices. And I think my favorite so far was First Class. I thought that was
terrific.
That was a terrific movie. And I liked this most recent one, except for that scene in Congress where those senators were bashing poor Peter Dinklage. I thought that was very mean. But did you, as everybody may or may not know, Len was in the most recent X-Men movie where he played a senator who gave Peter Dinklage a hard time. Len, when you, did they come and pick you up from the limo? Like what? How'd that come about? Did you just drive to the set and they made you shave, or what?
Well, actually, they made everybody shave but me.
Oh, you had your mustache?
I was the only guy that looked just like myself. I had dark hair and a beard, and the rest of them were all white haired and clean shaven. They even made Chris Claremont shave off his beard.
Wow, that's crazy. I would grow a beard and then shave it off if I could be in the X-Men.
No, it was a great experience. It was a lot of fun. I would do it again in a second.
Have you gotten to meet Hugh Jackman?
Oh, Hugh and I are now friends.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we're actually buddies. We email each other all the time and we're constantly talking about things.
Will you give him my email and tell him to...
No. I'm Bogart. It's mine.
If you could get Wolverine to kill anything, My Little Pony or a Care Bear, what would it be?
I kind of like the Care Bears. The pony's kind of good. We can turn the next X-Men movie into Equus.
Yes.
With animated Japanese animated adaptations of X-Men, which one was your favorite?
The animated of all the animated X-Men interpretations, which one is your favorite?
I think the first regular ongoing series.
In the 90s?
Yeah.
Do we have a clip from that? Anthony, do we have a clip from the 90s X-Men? With that? Yeah. Let's see a clip of Len's favorite X-Men.
Maybe it's one night. There were no Triceratops in the episode.
Or we should have just kept it up.